Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Sarah from Handmade After Dark. I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator in Australia, and welcome to Thursday Tech. So for those who are new to this series, this is my monthly technique based series, and this month for January we are doing the floating Reinker technique. So this is a technique that uses reinkers, also uses some heat embossing. It's a lot of fun, can be slightly messy, but it is good fun. So let's get started. So I have some watercolor paper. I'm using the silicone mat that came with my glass mat. Doesn't matter if you don't have one of these. This is just for the reinkers, but you can just use your block. Any of your spare blocks, you can use that instead. And we're just going to use that for putting some Reinker on. So I will use that for one of my Reinkers. Got my Versamark and embossing tools for some heat embossing, black embossing powder. You can also do this with white, or realistically any color that you want. But I'm going with black for this one. And then I have a spritzer and the aqua painters. So the aqua painters come in a pack of 3, and you've got different sizes. So the size you use is going to partly depend on the size of the image. So I'm using one of the fairly small brushes because I'm using a small image. Now, one thing to be careful of with choosing your image for this technique is you need an outline image, and ideally you want one with a reasonably thick edge. The thicker the better. And the one I'm using for this one isn't super thick, but it's thick enough. So I'm using the Gallery Blooms. I do have another card to show you that has with the beautiful butterflies, which is on the last chance list, and that one's a much thicker border, so I'll show you that one as well later. But one thing to be mindful of, and whether or not it's an issue is going to depend on your overall design of the project, is so with this one, and I don't know how well you can see, I'm just going to try and zoom in a little. So with the image for this one, there's a couple of spots. So there's one right there, and over the other side, and there's a couple of little spots where it's not actually, there's a couple of very fine ones there where it doesn't actually it's not completely solid, so there's a bit of a gap in the line. So depending on whether you're going to be fussy cutting your image afterwards, or if it's part of, like if you're stamping sort of on your final piece that will be adhered, you need to be mindful of that because that will affect your project. So for this one I'm going to be fussy cutting so it doesn't matter, because I'm using this one, I'll be able to show you what happens when you have gaps. So just be mindful of the design that you choose based on your overall design of your project. All right, I'll just zoom back out a bit. Let's get back. There we go. All right. And of course the other thing I have is Reinkers. So for this one I am using Pretty in Pink, Petunia Pop, Berry Burst and Old Olive. You don't need to have that many. You can do it with just one color, potentially 2 depending on your design, so you don't have to have a whole stack. This is just what I'm using for this particular project. Alrighty, so first thing we need to do is to heat emboss images. So I have got my embossing buddy, so make sure you go over your paper well with your embossing buddy, and I've got 2 pieces for this one because I need two of the image, and I'll just move that out of the way. All right, so nope, Versamark. My Versamarking pad is quite old, so I'm going to make sure it's well inked up. I have re-inked it recently, but I do want to make sure I've got plenty of embossing powder on there. And I know this fits on here because I tested it earlier. And because we are using watercolor paper, it's got a bit of texture, so you do want to make sure that you do sort of press down fairly firmly with your image to make sure you get the Versamark everywhere, well, everywhere that you want it. And I will add the powder quickly to this one. You don't need to move super quickly because Versamark takes longer to dry, which is why we use it for heat embossing. Just that I do have the fan and aircon going because it is very, very hot, so I don't want it drying out ahead of time. And then repeat the same for the second image. And add some embossing powder to that. Alright, I'll just put the lid back on my Versamark before I end up with it filled with embossing powder. Just tap off the excess. That's looking pretty good. And then grab the other one. I might just use my tweezers to pick it up just because it's got lots of embossing powder on it. Doesn't really matter for this one too much about bits of embossing powder that end up around the image because I'm going to be fussy cutting anyway, but it's more habit than anything else. Alright, so I'm going to tip this back in the jar before I end up spilling it and getting it everywhere. Alrighty. And we can move that out of the way. Then we can heat emboss. So I put when I'm heat embossing, I use a wooden clipboard. You definitely don't want to use plastic with a bit of foil on it because the foil helps when you heat from above. The foil sort of holds some of that heat and helps to heat from the bottom as well, so it doesn't warp as much. You'll see it warp a bit at the start, but then it sort of tends to flatten out a bit more so than when you're just doing it from one side. I'm just going to move this out of the way. It should be fine, but just in case. Alrighty. And we're just looking for the black powder to go shiny. And you do want to make sure that the entire thing has melted. But you also want to be careful not to overheat. So I think that first one is looking pretty good. Move on to the next one. Alrighty, let's have a look and just make sure it is fully melted everywhere, because if it hasn't set properly, then the technique won't work as well. And I think that is okay. I'm just going to do a touch more over here just in case. I think it's alright, but just to be on the safe side. Alrighty, I think that's pretty good. And when you're using the clipboard with a metal clip, just be careful when you go to take these off, because it can be quite hot. So you potentially may want to wait a little bit, or just carefully check to make sure that you're not going to burn yourself. So that's looking good to go. Alrighty, I'm just going to trim this one down because we don't need the whole thing. And I'll do one at a time, just because you want to make sure that you keep, that it stays wet for this technique. So, move that out of the way, bring my mat back in. I'll move that one for the moment. So, we just want a small amount of each of the Reinkers. So you just need, a drop or two, depending on the size of your image, and how much of each color you are going to use. So you don't need a lot, and you can always add more if you find that you haven't got enough. So you can always add more. And then a little bit of old olive. I'm going to put that on my block, also partly also because, as you can see, when you've got them out, it's not obvious initially what color they are. Once we add a bit of water to it, it'll be a little bit more obvious. I'm going to zoom in a little. Just want to make sure that I'm not too far zoomed in, but also so that you can see a bit better. Alrighty, so first thing we want to do is grab the spritzer, and we want to get the cardstock, the water color, nice and wet. So spritz all over, make sure the entire image is wet. And then I'm going to grab one of my brushes, and so I've filled this with water, I'm going to add a little bit to the Reinkers, and then, although you don't, that is optional, depends on the depth of colour that you want, but we're just going to pick up a bit and drop it on the cardstock. So you can see, you just put a drop down, and because of all the water, it spreads. Now because I've added water to the Reinker, it doesn't spread as much, but that's sort of what I want for this first one anyway. Alrighty, so that's enough for that one, and just make sure you get the colour out of your water painter before you move on to the next one. And I find that just sort of brushing off isn't enough. You need to squeeze some of the water out to make sure that the colour is out. Okay, so for the next one, I won't add any water at this point. I'm just going to pick up and so you can see it, how it spreads, just spreads in all the water. So the more water you have on your cardstock, the more it will spread. And I'm waiting for one of the ones to go outside the lines, but it hasn't quite done that yet, but it will. Especially when I do the leaves, because that's where a lot of it is. And you can go in and add as much as you want. You can move it around if there's not enough where you want it, and just add more. You can go back with lighter colors if you want. I'm going to spread that one around a bit more. And you may need to add more water at times if you've got spots that don't have a lot and it's dried out a bit much. You may need to add a bit more water. That's fine. You can either use your spritzer or just add drops with your brush. And then I'm going to add in the final one. So this side is starting to dry out a bit more. This one has got more water, but also because it's also because of the way it was sitting, it was also pooling more on the left hand side. Alright, I'm going to come back in with a bit more of the Pretty in Pink. I'm going to pick up a reasonable amount of that one just because I have diluted it with the water, so it's a little paler, so I'm just going to add extra. And at this point of the project, it often it can look like a bit of a mess. That is absolutely fine. That is what will happen. When it dries though, then it will look much better. And it doesn't seem to be, it's not quite doing what I wanted it to do in terms, oh, there's a little bit that started to spread on the outside the lines. So hopefully it will, I'm hoping it will do that a bit more, but there's not as much water there anymore, so it doesn't spread as much. But so you can see how this one, it has spread outside. So depending on, you know, the size of the gaps and how much water you've got on your project, it can spread quite a lot. So if that's something that, because of the particular design you're going with, you don't want, you do need to be extra careful. And you can, and I will, with the other card of the other image, I will do the same technique, but I'll do it without overly spritzing and just squeezing out the water from the aqua painter to add your water, rather than spritzing all over. So you can see now it's sort of starting to spread outside. And you may actually want that, depending on your design. It can actually be part of the effect. Just think about that sort of thing before you start, so that you can choose your method appropriately. And so I'm going to add a bit of extra colour to some parts. I want to keep some of it, some lighter, some darker. Alrighty, I think I'm going to add just a tiny bit more of the pink. I might need to add some more ink to that one for the next one. And a bit more there. Alright, that will do for that one for the moment. We'll put that one aside, bring in the second one. I will add a bit more Reinker to that one. So if you don't want to spritz, because you want to try and minimize the spread, you can pick up, actually I might add a separate little bit of Reinker, and then squeeze your Reinker till water comes out, and then spread that carefully. Try and avoid going sort of too close to any areas where there is that gap, just in case, but you can add the water this way rather than with the spritzer if you need to avoid, or try and avoid, getting too close. And we'll just go around, squeezing out a bit of water as I go. I might just add some all the way around. And sometimes your cardstock will try and curl up, as mine is doing. So if you can, hold it down so that the water doesn't sort of all just pool in the center, because then you won't get, it'll move away from the edges and technique won't work as well. Alright, a little bit more to add. Alrighty, I think that is enough to start. Let's move on to the next color. I'm going to add a bit more water on this side because it is starting to dry, because we've only added a small amount. And then we just have one more colour for the flowers. Just clean my blender pen, and the last one is going mostly in the center for this one. So I will add a bit more water so some of it spreads a bit more. And I think that will do for that one. Then we just need to do the leaves. So I'll add some drops of water to this one because I'm not fussed about it going outside, because I'm going to be fussy cutting. Oop. So that's another thing to be mindful of. So I don't know if you saw that, but when I put that ink down, yeah, it spread sort of on the leaves, but it also spread on to the flower. So I'm going to pick up some of that water, and it should be okay, partly because we can add, it's a darker color than the leaves, and we can go back and add a bit more just in case. So don't stress too much if that happens, unless it's gone onto a really light color. Then you may need to change your color scheme if that happens. But generally we can work with it. Alrighty, I'm going to just pick up a little bit of that water just in case, just to keep it off the flowers. And I'm going to make a little bit darker in sections. Alrighty. Okay, now that that is done, we need to leave them to dry, and they can take a bit of time. Partly depends on the temperature where you are. Do not use your heat tool to speed up the drying process, because if you do that, you'll remelt the embossing powder, and then you'll wreck your project. So do not use your heat tool, just leave them to dry. So it may take a while, but you can prepare the rest of your project. And then if you are, if you're cutting out your image, I recommend fussy cutting rather than die cutting, especially if you are doing it before it's completely dry. I fussy cut for these partly because I didn't want a white border around it. So I will put these to the side and I will cut those out later, but once I find a spot to put them. And so let's just move some of this out of the way. So here are the two that I prepared earlier and have cut out. So these are fully dry, and so particularly with this one, you can see all the different shading. This one doesn't have as much, but that's because I did add a lot more of the darker ink, whereas on this one I didn't add quite so much. So we will put together the rest of the project now. And you don't worry about taking down measurements or the products you used and all that. If you are on my email list, I will be sending out next week, so my Wednesday email, I'll be sending out a project recipe card, and it includes all the products used, all the dimensions, and some hints and tips as well. So you don't need to worry about taking down all the measurements and all the details. Head over to my blog at handmadeafterdark.com.au, sign up to my newsletter, and then you will get the project recipe card for this. And you will also get the Fun Fold Friday, which is another monthly class that I do. So you will get the project recipes for that as well. That will come the following week. All right, so for the sentiment, for this one, I am using the Beautiful Motifs set, and I'm just going to use this one. So I'm going to make this a wedding card, but you can use whatever fits and whatever you would like. So I'm using Secret Sea for the ink, but you can absolutely use Memento Black. I really like Secret Sea. It's a dark blue-black ink, and it's a really nice color, especially when you don't necessarily want just straight black. It's very close to black. It's really nice. So I'm just going to ink that up, and I'm going for the center. And then I've got some basic white that I have embossed. So I've got my card base. This is Berry Burst. Some basic white that I've embossed with the exposed bricks. I will add some adhesive to that. I'm using the liquid adhesive because it tends to sort of gets into all the little nooks and crannies for your embossed cardstock. So I find it does tend to adhere a little better. I just need to, I think it's almost time for a new one. This one is still got a bit, but it's running out. I use it a lot. Alright, so just make sure there's plenty there. And it also gives you that little bit of time if you need to adjust your piece slightly. And then I've got some, so these are the Nested Essentials dies. So we will stick the white one to the larger Berry Burst. And then we'll adhere this one. So that's going in the center. And then we're going to pop these up on dimensionals. And then do the same for the other one. And that should be enough. Alrighty. So now we just need to get all those backings off. And we're just going to adhere one to each corner. So one up the top. And I might just move that over slightly, if it will let me. There we go. And one down there. And then all we need to do is add some embellishment. So I'm using the frosted iridescent dots. So these are on the last chance list. These are from the Lights of Aurora suite. So we will add just a few of these. And one up there. Oops. And there we go. So that is that one, and then I will show you another one that I did. So this is using the Beautiful Butterflies set. So for this one, I didn't cut anything out. But as you can see, this one's got a much thicker border, which is really good when you are going with a design where you're not going to be cutting the image out. So you do want to be careful about, not having the ink go outside the lines, like particularly if you've got any gaps, or if you've got a bit too much water, or if the paper curls up or tilts in a particular direction and then the water sort of spreads outside the lines. So for this one I used I think the same colours as this one, so Petal Pink, Petunia Pop, and it was Petunia Pop, Berry Burst and Blackberry Bliss. But also some Pretty Peacock. So the little bits of blue that you can see in there, that's the Pretty Peacock. So this is a really good technique when you, particularly when you're using different colours, so the Pretty Peacock and the purples, because it's like you will get a different effect every single time. And then for the surrounding areas, I just used Pool Party. I just diluted it down quite a bit because I did want it fairly light. So I made sure the paper was really wet, but also added water to the Reinker to make sure it was really, really watered down. Alrighty, so they are the two projects with the floating Reinker technique. I do hope you give it a go. If you do, I would love to see what you come up with. There is a list of all the products used in the description for this video if you're watching on YouTube. And don't forget, if you're on my email list, you will get the project recipe with all the measurements, products, and some hints and tips for these cards. Alrighty, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the projects. If you are watching this on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out and I do appreciate it. Next week will be Fun Fold Friday, so I'll be back Friday next week with a Fun Fold project for you. So I hope you join me then. Well, it's recorded, but watch the replay. Thank you again. Until next time, happy crafting. Bye.